Hello, my third graders. Are you ready for the next chapter in Voyage of the Dawn Treader? I know I am. So when we left them, Lucy and the guys, Edmund and Eustace and Caspian and I think Drinian, went on shore where they discovered a beautifully kept home, but there didn't seem to be anybody home until they realized that there was something with big, heavy footsteps and a voice that talked to them out of the air. It was invisible, and they found out that there was a magician that lived in the house, and the creatures, whatever they are, happened to go up, and they said the magician had made them ugly. And so they went up and they said, and they got into his magic books and they found an incantation to make them invisible. But now they're sick of being invisible, and the only person who can help them is Lucy. Lucy's got to go into the house and find the spell in the magician's book to undo the invisibility. Kind of scary. Chapter 10, The Magician's Book. The invisible people feasted their guests royally. It was very funny to see the plates and dishes coming to the tables and not see anyone carrying them. It would have been funny if they had moved on the level of the floor, as you would expect things to do with invisible hands, but they didn't. They progressed up the long dining hall in a series of bounds or jumps. At the highest point of each jump, a dish would go about 15 feet in the air. Then it would come down and stop quite suddenly about 3 or 4 feet from the floor. When a dish contained anything like soup or stew, the result was rather disastrous. "I'm beginning to feel very inquisitive about these people," whispered Eustace to Edmund. "Do you think they're human at all? More like huge grasshoppers or giant frogs, I should say." "It does look like it," said Edmund, "but don't put the idea of grasshoppers into Lucy's head. She's not keen on insects, especially big ones." The meal would have been pleasanter if it had not been so exceedingly messy. Also, if the conversation had not consisted entirely of agreements. The invisible people agreed about everything. Indeed, most of their remarks were the sort that would not be easy to disagree with. "What I always say is, when a chap's hungry, he likes some victuals." Or, "It's getting dark now, always does at night." Or even, "You've come over the water. Powerful wet stuff, isn't it?" And Lucy could not help looking at the dark, yawning entrance at the foot of the staircase. She would see it from where she sat, and wondering what she would find when she went up those stairs next morning. It was a good meal otherwise, with mushroom soup and boiled chicken and hot boiled ham and gooseberries and red currants and curds and creams, milk and mead. The others liked the mead, but Eustace was sorry afterwards that he had drunk any of it. When Lucy woke the next morning, it was like waking up on the day of an examination, or a day when you have to go to the dentist. It was a lovely morning, with bees buzzing in and out of their open windows and lawn outside looking very much like somewhere in England. She got up and dressed and tried to talk and eat ordinarily at breakfast. Then, after being instructed by the chief voice about what she was to do upstairs, she bid goodbye to the others, said nothing, walked to the bottom of the stairs, and began going up them without once looking back. It was quite light. It was one good thing. There was indeed a window straight ahead of her at the top of the first flight. As long as she was on that flight, she could hear the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall below. When she came to the landing, she turned to her left up the next flight, and after that, she couldn't hear the clock anymore. Now she had come to the top of the stairs. Lucy looked and saw a long, wide passage with a large window at the far end. Apparently, the passage ran the whole length of the house. It was carved and paneled and carpeted, and very many doors opened off of it to each side. She stood still and couldn't hear the squeak of a mouse or the buzzing of a fly or the swaying of a curtain or anything except the beating of her own heart. "The last doorway on the left," she said to herself. It did seem a bit hard that it had to be the last. To reach it, she would have to walk past room after room. And in any room there might be the magician, asleep or awake or invisible or even dead. But it wouldn't do to think about that. She set out on her journey. The carpet was so thick that her feet made no noise. "There's nothing to be afraid of yet," Lucy told herself. And certainly it was a quiet, sunlit passage, perhaps a bit too quiet. It would have been nicer if there had not been strange signs painted in scarlet on the doors, twisty, complicated things which obviously had meaning, But it mightn't be very nice meanings either. It would have been nicer if there weren't those masks hanging on the wall. Not that they were exactly ugly, or not so very ugly, but the empty eye holes did look strange. And if you let yourself look, you would start imagining that the masks were doing things as your back was turned to them. After about the sixth door, she got her first real fright. For 1 second, she almost felt certain that a wicked little bearded face had popped out of the wall and made a grimace at her. She forced herself to stop and look at it. And it was not a face at all. It was a little mirror, just the size and shape of her own face, with hair on the top of it and a beard hanging down from it. So when you looked in the mirror, you saw your own face fitted into the hair and the beard, and it looked as if they belonged to you. I just caught my own reflection with the tail of my eye as I went past, said Lucy to herself. That was all it was. It's quite harmless. But she didn't like the look of her own face with that hair and beard, and went on. I don't know what the bearded glass was for, because I'm not a magician. Before she reached the last door on the left, Lucy was beginning to wonder whether the corridor had grown longer since she had begun her journey, and whether this was part of the magic of the house. But she got to it at last. The door was open. It was a large room with 3 big windows, and it was lined from floor to ceiling with books, more books than Lucy had ever seen before. Tiny little books, fat dumpy books, books bigger than any church Bible you've ever seen, all bound in leather and smelling old and learned and magical. But she knew from her instructions that she need not bother about any of those, for the book, the magic book, was lying on a reading desk in the middle of the room. She saw she would have to read it standing, and anyway, there weren't any chairs, and also that she would have to stand with her back to the door while she read it. So at once she turned to shut the door. It wouldn't shut. Some people may disagree with Lucy about this, but I think she was quite right. She said she wouldn't have minded if she could have shut the door. But it was unpleasant to stand in a place like that with an open doorway right behind your back. I should have felt the same. But there was nothing else to be done. One thing that worried her a good deal was the size of the book. The chief voice had not been able to give her any idea the whereabouts in the book. The spell for making things visible came. He even seemed rather surprised at her asking. He expected her to begin at the beginning and go on till she came to it. Obviously, it wouldn't have occurred to him that there'd be any other way of finding a place in a book. But it might take me days or weeks, said Lucy, looking at the huge volume, and I'm already feeling like I've been in this place for hours. She went up to the desk and laid her hand on the book. Her fingers tingled when she touched it, as if it were full of electricity. She tried to open it, but couldn't at first. This, however, was only because it was fastened by 2 leaden clasps. When she had undone these, it opened quite easily enough. And what a book it was! It was written, not printed, written in clear, even hand, with thick downstrokes and thin upstrokes, very large, easier than print, and so beautiful that Lucy stared at it for a whole minute and forgot about reading it. The paper was crisp and smooth, and a nice smell came from it. And in the margins, and round the big colored capital letters, at the beginning of each spell, there were pictures. There was no title page or title. The spells began straight away, and at first there was nothing very important in them. They were cures for warts by washing your hands in moonlight from a silver basin, and toothache and cramps, and a spell for taking a swarm of bees. The picture of the man with the toothache was so lifelike, it would have set your own teeth aching if you looked at it too long. And the golden bees which dotted all over the 4th spell looked for a moment as if they were really flying. Lucy could hardly tear herself away from the first page, but when she turned it over, the next was just as interesting. Oh, but I must get on, she told herself. And on she went for about 30 pages, which, if she could have remembered them, would have taught her how to find buried treasure, how to remember things forgotten, how to forget things you wanted to forget, how to tell whether anyone was speaking the truth, how to call up or prevent wind, fog, snow, sleet, or rain, how to produce enchanted sleeps, and how to give a man a donkey's head, as they did to poor Bottom. That's from a play in Shakespeare called A Midsummer Night's Dream. When you're older, you'll read it, and you'll love it because Shakespeare's awesome. And the longer she read, the more wonderful and more real the pictures became. Then she came to a page which was just a blaze of pictures that one hardly noticed the writing. Hardly. But she did notice the first words. They were, "An infallible spell to make beautiful her that uttereth it beyond the lot of mortals." Lucy peered at the pictures with her face close to the page and thought that they seemed crowded and muddlesome before. She found now she could see them quite clearly. The first was a picture of a girl standing by a reading desk, reading in a huge book. The girl was dressed exactly like Lucy. In the next picture, Lucy, for the girl in the picture was Lucy herself, was standing up with her mouth open and a rather terrible expression on her face, chanting or reciting something. In the third picture, the beauty beyond the lot of mortals had come to her. It was strange and considerable how small the pictures had looked at first, that Lucy in the picture now seemed quite as big as the real Lucy. And they looked into each other's eyes, and the real Lucy looked away after a few minutes because she was dazzled by the beauty of the other Lucy, though she could still see a sort of likeness to herself in that beautiful face. And now the pictures came crowding in on her thick and fast. She saw herself throned on high in a great tournament in Calormen, and all the kings of the world fought because of her beauty. After that it turned from tournament to real wars, and all Narnia and Archenland, Telmar and Kalmar, Galma, Terabithia were laid waste in the fury of kings and dukes and great lords who fought for her favor. Then it changed, and Lucy, still beautiful beyond the lot of mortals, was back in England, and soon Susan, who had always been the beauty of the family, came home from America, and Susan in the picture looked exactly like the real Susan, only plainer, with a nasty expression. And Susan was jealous of the dazzling beauty of Lucy, but that didn't matter a bit because no one cared anything about Susan now. "Oh, I will say the spell," said Lucy. "I don't care, I will." And she said, "I don't care," because she had a strong feeling that she mustn't. But when she looked back at the opening words of the spell, there in the middle of the writing, where she felt quite sure there had been no picture before, she found the face of a lion, of the lion, Aslan himself, staring into hers. It was painted such a bright gold that he seemed to be coming toward her out of the page, and indeed, she never was quite sure afterward that it hadn't really moved a little. At any rate, she knew the expression on his face quite well. He was growling, and you could see most of his teeth. She became horribly afraid and turned the page at once. Sounds like Aslan saved her from making a very poor choice indeed. A little later, she came to a spell which would let you know what her friends thought about you. Now, Lucy had wanted very badly to try the other spell, the one that made you beautiful beyond the lot of mortals. So she felt, to make up for not having said it, she would really say this one. And all in a hurry, for fear that her mind would change, she said the words. Nothing will induce me to tell you what they were. Then she waited for something to happen. As nothing happened, she began looking at the pictures, and all at once she saw the very last thing she expected. A picture of a third-class carriage in the train, with two schoolgirls sitting in it. She knew them at once. They were Marjorie Preston and Anne Featherstone. Only now, it was much more than a picture. It was alive. She could see the telegraph poles flicking past on the outside in the window. She could see the two girls laughing and talking, and then gradually, like the radio coming on, she would hear what it was they were saying. "Shall I see anything of you this term?" said Anne. "Are you still going to be all taken up with that Lucy Pevensey?" "I don't know what you mean by taken up," said Marjorie. "Oh, yes, you do," said Anne. "You were crazy about her last term." "No, I wasn't," said Marjorie. "And I've got more sense than that. Not a bad little kid in her way, but I was getting pretty tired of her before the end of term." "Well, you jolly well won't have any chance any other term," shouted Lucy. "Two-faced little beast." But the sound of her own voice at once reminded her that she was talking to a picture, and the real Marjorie was far away and in another world. "Well," said Lucy to herself, I did think better of her than that. I did all sorts of things for her last term, and I stuck up for her when not many other girls would, and she knows it, too. And to Anne Featherstone, of all people. I wonder, are all my friends the same? There's a lot of pictures. No, I won't look at any more. I won't. With a great effort, she turned over the page, but not before a large, angry tear had splashed on it. On the next page, she came to a spell for the refreshment of the spirit. The pictures were fewer here, but very beautiful. What Lucy found herself reading was more like a story than a spell. It went on for 3 pages before she had read the bottom page. She had forgotten what she was reading at all. She was living in the story itself as if it were real. And all the pictures were real, too. When she had gotten to the 3rd page and come to the end, she said, "That was the loveliest story I've ever read, or ever shall read in my whole life. I wish I would have gone on and reading it for 10 years. At least I'll read it over again." But here's the part of the magic book that came into play. You couldn't turn back. The right-hand pages, the ones ahead, could be turned. The left-hand pages could not. "What a shame," said Lucy. "I did so want to read it again. Well, at least I must remember. Let's see, it was about, dear, it's all fading away again. Even this last page is going blank. This is a very strange book. How could I have forgotten? It was about a cup and a sword and a tree and a green hill. I know that much, but I can't remember, and what shall I do?" Now, this is a story for the refreshment of the spirit that involved things like a cup and a sword and a tree and a green hill. Sounds an awful lot like maybe the Holy Week story. You think about the cup that Jesus had and the sword, we're getting to that later this week, that Peter tried to defend Jesus, and a tree, that would be like the cross, and a green hill, that would be where Jesus died. Or maybe the tomb, where that stood empty on Easter morning. Just some food for thought. That's my own little thought. C.S. Lewis didn't write that. That's just me. And she could never remember it ever since that day. What Lucy means by a good story is a story that reminds her of the forgotten story in the magician's book. She turned on and found to her surprise a page with no pictures at all, but the first words were, "A spell to make hidden things visible." She read it through to make sure that all the hard words, and then she said it out loud. She knew at once that it was working because when she spoke, the colors came into the capital letters on the top of the page, and pictures began to appear in the margins. It was like when you hold fire to something written in invisible ink, and the writing gradually shows up, only instead of dingy colors of lemon juice, which is the easiest invisible ink, this was all gold and blue and scarlet. They were odd pictures and contained many figures that Lucy did not much like to take the look of. And then she thought, "I suppose I've made everything visible, and not only the thumpers. This might be lots of other invisible things hanging about a place like this. I'm not sure I want to see them all." At that moment, she heard a soft, heavy footfall coming along the corridor behind her. And of course, she remembered that she had been told about the magician walking in his bare feet and making no more noise than a cat. It is always better to turn around than have something creeping up behind your back. Lucy did so. Then her face lit up, till for a moment, but of course she didn't know it, she looked almost as beautiful as the other Lucy in the picture. She ran forward with a little cry of delight, and with her arms stretched out, for what stood in the doorway was Aslan himself, the lion, the highest of all high kings. He was solid and real and warm, and he let her kiss and bury herself in his shining mane. From the low, earthquake-like sound that came from inside him, Lucy even dared to think that he was purring. "Oh, Aslan," said she, "it's so kind of you to come." "I have been here all the time," he said, "but you have made me visible." "Aslan," said Lucy almost a little reproachfully, "don't make fun of me, as if anything I could do would make you visible." "It did," said Aslan. "Do you think I wouldn't obey my own rules?" After a little pause, he spoke again. "Child, I think you have been eavesdropping." "Eavesdropping?" "You listened to what your 2 schoolfellows were saying about you." "Oh, that? I never thought that was eavesdropping, Aslan. Wasn't it just magic?" "Spying on people by magic is the same as spying on them in any other way. You have misjudged your friend. She's weak, but she loves you. She was afraid of the older girl, and what she said she did not mean. I don't think I'll ever be able to forget what I heard her say." "No, you won't." Oh dear, said Lucy, have I spoiled everything? Do you mean we would have gone on being friends if it hadn't been for this? And been really good friends all our lives, perhaps, and now we never shall? Child, said Aslan, did I not explain to you once before that no one has ever told what would have happened? Yes, Aslan, you did, said Lucy. I'm sorry, but please, speak on, dear heart. Shall I ever be able to read the story again? The one I couldn't remember? Will you tell it to me, Aslan? Oh, do, do, do. Yes, indeed. I will tell it to you for years and years. But now come. We must meet the master of this house. The next chapter is called The Dufflepuds Made Happy. Hope you enjoyed that chapter. It's a good one.